Today is the 29th of September, 2015. The title is The Inconclusive Resolution of the Iran-Contra Scandal, 1987-88. My guest is DeWitt, Athens News, and I am Robert Whaley, retired historian from Ohio University. And this is the Athens Speakout number 348. Now, last time, on July of 1985, the United States press was asking Ronald Reagan's administration to do some explaining. They wanted to know if the administration had any plans for springing 7 American hostages from Lebanon, and why were they in jail? And the second question was to the Ronald Reagan administration, and Ronald Reagan didn't know the answer. He had to call in his cabinet. The second question was, is the administration sending arms to the right-wing counter-revolutionaries, the Somocistas in Honduras, who were trying to overthrow the recently installed victorious Sandinista National Liberation Government? And that government, the Sandinistas, had captured Managua, the capital, in 1979. And the leader of the Sandinistas was Daniel Ortega. And he had the support of lots of coffee growers. And the second problem in Lebanon was that a Lebanese newspaper reported the activities of a United States Marine, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, and he was caught delivering American weapons in a DC-6 in a transport, delivering those supplies to the Contras in Honduras. Well, what was Ollie North doing out there was the big question. And are these counter-revolutionary Somocistas a band of bandits? And why is the Democratic Party leadership in Congress, why had they passed an amendment called the Bolin Amendment in 1982, which supposedly forbade the CIA from getting involved in Central American civil wars? So is the Reagan administration knowing what it's doing? And are these CIA agents in Nicaragua legitimate or illegal or not? So in 1986, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North was exposed by the Lebanese press, and that then came into the American press. And the American press said, well, that violates the Bolin Amendment, and that's trying to overthrow the Sandinista National Liberation Front in Nicaragua, and we don't like that business. And who are these people? Well, it was a coalition of Marxists, and these Marxists got supplies from Fidel Castro's Cubans, and it was a coalition of Marxists and socialists and liberals. And it seems that Mikhail Gorbachev and the communist government in Moscow was nowhere to be seen, because in 1985, he in Moscow was facing a descent from Poland and East Germany and Hungary, and he didn't know anything about Central America either. So if the Soviets sent any material, it was through Castro's army that was doing it. And that was the complex operations going on. And at the end of the hour, we got up to 1986, November 1986, And the question we asked, what were the results of the November 1986 midterm elections that gave the Senate Democrats new strength to question Ronald Reagan's administration of what was going on in Central America? There you go. You can carry on.
That was a nice summary bringing us up. Well, the Democrats regained power in the Senate, and they regained committeeship, which means that they were able to launch investigations through the committees that they controlled.
Right.
And these committees were able to expose some of the goings-on in the Reagan administration that they would have rather kept quiet, I would think.
Yes, that's true. So the Democrats picked up 8 new seats, and Robert Byrd of West Virginia became the new majority leader, and Senator Robert Dole from Kansas lost 8 seats, and he was in no position to block this investigation. So I just want to go over some of the new Democratic senators. They were not elected on any regional basis. There was one from Vermont, one from Connecticut, 2 from New England, total, and one from Maryland, a border state, a mid-Atlantic state, adding their strength to Democratic senators in Delaware and Pennsylvania. Then there were 4 new southern seats in the Democratic Party: North Carolina, Louisiana, Georgia, Florida. And then there were 2 plain states, Democrats, who won: North Dakota and South Dakota. And then 2 from the far west, one from Washington and one from Nevada. Well, that's an interesting comment, but the Democratic majority were kind of independent persons and diverse, and some of them were not interested in this, and some of them were. So let's raise the second question. What were the consequences of the 1986 senatorial election for a second civil war going on in El Salvador? Did that make any difference?
Not immediately, but it did pave a path, I believe, toward... this was a 12-year conflict in El Salvador.
That's right.
This has been going on for a good 8 years by that point.
Yeah, well, the Iran-Contra hearings didn't go into El Salvador very much.
No.
That was kind of on a back burner. But in the press, the people who were concerned about Nicaragua and El Salvador saw a kind of a connection, because they were both coffee plantation states. So there was not much difference in the short run. But there was a long-term economic interest.
And you had similar fights going on, right, with the liberation, the left.
Well, a different side won.
Right.
The government of El Salvador kept power, and the revolutionaries lost.
Yeah.
The National Liberation Front in El Salvador didn't win. Where the opposite thing happened in Nicaragua. At least the Sandinistas won for 10 years, and then eventually the Sandinistas began to peter out. But in any case, the National Liberation Front in El Salvador was called the Faraburo Marti, left-wing opposition.
Yeah.
And they began in October of 1979, same time in a sense. And they were probably getting weapons from the Sandinistas in Nicaragua, and they were probably getting Castro's weapons. But this was never proven, and we didn't have much investigation of that. What did turn out was that the United States State Department was backing the government, and they got aid from the right-wing Kuomintang in Taiwan and the West German government that wanted law and order, and the Brazilian government that wanted law and order, that would take the heat off the State Department. And on the left, the National Liberation Front, the Martí National Liberation Front, got some support from the Soviet Union and Cuba and the People's Republic of China, but they had insufficient funds. So in the long run, the United States money won in that long-term operation. So I'll take a look at the two armies, their size. In 1980, the government had an army of only 9,850 soldiers, and the left escalated the terms up to 12,000, 18,000 revolutionaries. And they started killing a lot of the army people. And but then the counter-revolutionaries set in, and the United States and its allies were able to increase the government's forces up to 70,000, and they killed a lot of the left, and they were reduced from 12 to 18,000 down to 8,000, 10,000 over a number of years. So the end result was that 7,000 from the army lost their lives since 1979, and 20,000 leftists lost their lives. And the war came to an end. It was negotiated in Mexico City in January of 1992, and the two sides agreed to have a United Nations mediation, and the right-wing government stayed in office. And you know who was behind that? Who was the big American guy in the State Department? The neoconservative who brought all this money there. Did you ever hear of...
In the State Department.
In the State Department. His name didn't surface until after Reagan retired. He got the rap for this because this war came to an end in 1992. Reagan was out of power then. Mm-hmm. But in 1992, it came out that it was Elliott Abrams.
Abrams, okay.
Yeah, he was the big neocon with the cash money that installed the right-wing government. And Jimmy Carter was forced to retreat out of there because it began when he was still in office in 1979. And Archbishop Romero was assassinated by the government. And just before he was assassinated, the more liberal Catholic Church wrote to Carter, well, you better take your State Department people out of there because you can never win. And some American nuns lost their lives. So they lost publicity in the divided Catholic Church in the United States. You had some Kennedy liberals, not neo, but, well, you had neocons on the right. And then on the left, you had liberation theology. So there's quite a debate within the Catholic Church about the two wars going on. And Ronald Reagan was not explaining who was who. And they took a public opinion poll. And this was amazing. Something like 89% of the American people didn't know who the good guys were in El Salvador or Nicaragua and whose side were you supposed to be on.
I can't say that's very surprising.
Oh, I thought it was a joke. Because only a few historians were really following the ins and outs of this. Well, I guess that's all I want to say about this El Salvadorian revolution and repression, unless you have any comments on that. Might say this, that El Salvador is the name of the country, San Salvador is the name of the capital, and it's the smallest state in Central America. And it has 5.7 million population, much more than Nicaragua per capita. They only have 2.5 million at that time. So the population of Nicaragua was smaller, and its density was smaller. But so they're much poorer per head. That's the point. And of course, it was a much more urban society, and the government could draft men from San Salvador to take care of the countryside, more or less. So the size of the country and the American money ultimately won for the right. And here's another interesting footnote. I find this absolutely fascinating. When George W. Bush was president in the year 2000, the American dollar bill took over as the local currency in San Salvador.
I had never heard that.
That's where the banks are. And all of the coffee goes to the United States. It's a one-crop country. So that's an example.
Coffee country.
Yeah,
right?
it's big business one. And I notice, well, anyway, that's about all I want to say about that. I think we can go on to another question. What can you tell us about a biography of the secret agent, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North, and what were his political activities in Israel and Honduras? What was he doing?
Well,
who is he? What did he do?
Oliver North, Ollie North.
Well, that's his nickname, Ollie.
Ollie. He was a United States Marine Corps lieutenant colonel who was working as a staff member in the National Security Council.
Right. But what did he do as a boy? You know anything about his origins?
His childhood?
Yeah.
I haven't read too much about his...
Well, he was born in 1943 in San Antonio, Texas. And he went to a small town high school in western New York, near Buffalo. And he had 2 years of college at the State University of Brockport, near Buffalo. And then he got an appointment, now this is key, an appointment to the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And one of his classmates was Jim Webb, a politician from Virginia.
Right.
You know anything about him?
Oh, yeah, I know Jim Webb. He's still around.
He's still around. Do you know what he was doing?
He's been governor and senator.
Right.
He's been several things. I don't know exactly what he was doing in the 80s.
Well, he was appointed by Ronald Reagan to be the Secretary of Navy.
Oh, okay.
He was part of the military-industrial complex.
Sure.
So there's a naval connection here to this whole operation.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't Webb a presidential candidate?
Now he's for the Democrats. He changed parties.
Yeah.
He figured out that we didn't need a 600-vessel Navy. And the left made a joke about that. All right, what are you going to do with these 600 ships? Ride into Tokyo Bay? That's not the problem in the Middle East. Anyway, North was a combat Marine. He went to Vietnam in 1968, and he got a few medals. And then he came back to Annapolis in Virginia in 1970, and in 1981 he was promoted to the Naval War College as Ronald Reagan's inauguration in 1981. So he's rising up as Ronald Reagan is rising up. And then the Bowen Amendment was passed in 1982.
This is the amendment that forbade, it was the first one of three eventually passed that incrementally forbade U.S. contributions to the Contras in fighting their war.
Well, it was against the CIA. It said, nobody had ever heard of the Contras at that point. It was against the CIA having any operations in Central America because the Democrats didn't want another Vietnam War. So they were trying to cut this off. And Ronald Reagan in November of '82 didn't think anything was going to happen. And the bill went through without anybody reading it. Because Ronald Reagan wasn't reading the newspapers at that time, and he could care less. He didn't have to read anything until 1985, when he had to answer some questions. Anyway, the second Boland Amendment was passed, as you say, after the new Congress in October of 1984, and they put some figures on it. They said that the administration had spent $300 million on funds for the countries. And that was prohibited by the Boland Amendment. But Ronald Reagan had his legal advisors and said, well, the Boland Amendment only pertains to the CIA. And it doesn't restrict the Pentagon or the National Security Agency from having any operations in these disputed countries. So that was the legalistic game that the two sides were playing in the Iran-Contra hearings.
Yeah. That was how he attempted to worm his way.
Well, he did. Reagan didn't get caught.
No.
And it was Senator John Tower from Texas who made his own report. And Tower gave a report to the Congress that Ronald Reagan didn't know anything about it.
Well, that was always Reagan's excuse, wasn't it?
Yeah.
He played the befuddled but jovial actor.
Right.
He was always a good actor.
He was a good actor, right. So anyway, the Department of Defense did spend $300 million on this operation. By 1986, when Oliver North was caught, and Oliver North's boss was Vice Admiral John Poindexter of the United States Navy, and his boss was he was the boss of Lieutenant Oliver North, okay? And North was supposedly reporting to Poindexter. But Poindexter said he didn't know anything about it either.
Everyone's ignorant.
And Oliver North said that the military operations in the Middle East were kind of hidden in the records, but you see, the National Security Agency had the source of these records. Mm-hmm. And Ronald Reagan, not Ronald Reagan, but Oliver North shredded them. So he says, there is no evidence, okay? Anyway, the Senate Investigation Committee of Senator Inouye from Hawaiian Islands and Senator and Representative Hamilton from Indiana opened up the committee, and North refused to testify. They wanted to know, they didn't particularly want to know much about the Israeli connection. They wanted to focus in on Nicaragua.
Yes.
And the Nicaragua hearing, the Contra theories were the main source of the Democratic investigation. So, Oliver North, in 1994, after Reagan retired, ran as governor of Virginia in a four-way race, and he ran against Senator Chuck Robb, LBJ's protege. And it's very interesting to see how that race went. It was a four-way race for the governor of Virginia. And North got 43% of the vote, but lost. And there was an independent candidate, a guy by the name of Lamar Coleman, who got 11% of the vote. And then there was a black candidate, Governor Wilder of Virginia. So Robb was a victor, but it was a very interesting close race. And Oliver North was still a hero in the eyes of some people, but he had no ethics. We never could find the religion of North. And the Attorney General was an Episcopalian, and he said, well, this is all unethical. And North was able to slip under the wires for a while, but it shows you that democracy did not win in the Reagan administration or in its aftermath. So going back to Ronald Reagan's cabinet in July of 1985, Ronald Reagan called his key advisors. He wanted to know, how did the Pentagon deliver these TOW missiles to Israel, and why did they deliver them to Israel? When publicly, Iran was publicly enemy number one, and why was the missile sent to Israel? And what did Israel do with the TOW missiles? They sent them to Iran.
Yeah.
And Iran wanted the TOW missiles because it fits the equipment that the American government had given 53 to 79, when Iran was an ally of the Shah and the oil companies and so forth and so on. And so they could use the missiles through this secret channel. So the next question is, how did Lieutenant Oliver North get involved in Israeli politics and Iranian politics, and how did he get involved in the traffic of these TOW missiles that were transferred to Iran?
Well, just like Israel was the go-between between the United States and Iran with the arms dealing.
Right.
And Oliver North was the messenger boy, basically, for lack of a better term, between the administration, the National Security Council, Israel, and thereby Iran. And on the other side, with Panama and Noriega and
there's supposedly some drug money
that's
involved.
how it gets back to Nicaragua. And so North was kind of he was the guy, the national security staff member, who was kind of at the center of all these moving parts. And he was the one who arranged the deals with Noriega and arranged the deals with Israel and got the approval from the administration for Israel to sell these weapons to Iran, because there was a moderate faction in Iran that wanted to reestablish relations somewhat with the United States in order to fight against Saddam Hussein in Iraq, who they were in the middle of the war with.
Yeah, okay, right. Yeah, so it's complicated.
It's very complicated. I think that complication is probably, to me, one of the big reasons why it never hit with as scandalous as it all was. I think the American people were just too confused by it all to really hold the Reagan administration accountable for what they did, which was sell arms to a state sponsor of terrorism to support an anti-democratic war.
Well, democracy got lost.
Democracy was never a priority.
All right. So how many missiles? How many TOW missiles were sent in 1985? When Ronald Reagan investigated this, he discovered in July of 1985 that there were 508 TOW missiles sent to Israel. And then they investigated 1986. Another 1,000 missiles were sent to 86. Okay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, these numbers I have August 20th, 96. TOW missiles. September 14th, 85, 408 more TOW missiles. November 24th, 85, 18 Hawk anti-aircraft missiles. February 86, 500 TOW missiles. 10 days later, another 500 TOW missiles. In May of that year, another 500 TOW missiles and 240 Hawk spare parts.
Those were for anti-aircraft. The TOW missiles were anti-tank weapons.
And Hawk are anti.
The Hawk is
aircraft.
Yeah, they might shoot down.
And anti-aircraft, I mean, that's significant because when you're talking about anti-aircraft weapons, you're talking about real full-scale army-on-army war. You're not talking about taking out some rebels. You're talking about engaging.
Yeah, but I think there are only 85 of those, right? There weren't too many.
Yeah, not too. It mostly was spare parts for those.
Yeah, right.
And then in October of '86, another 500 tow missiles.
Right. Now,
Let's take Station Rick.
okay, we got to stop here. We're talking about the complex Iran-Contra scandal, 1985, 86, 87, and it goes on into 88 when Ronald Reagan retires. And Ollie North was exposed, but Reagan was able to fall between the cracks. And I'm speaking with Dave DeWitt, pioneer journalist for Athens News.
I think what's amazing, or impressive at least, about the Reagan administration is how many people of that administration who were indicted for various cases of fraud and corruption and felonious activity. And Ronald Reagan somehow was able to skate free from all of it.
Right.
And now, 30 years later, in retrospect, enjoys this reputation amongst people on the right as some great hero president. They want to put him on the currency.
Yeah. It's all mythology. I wouldn't put him on a currency.
Oh, I wouldn't at all. Absolutely not.
Well, the United States did get the 7 captives out of the Hezbollah. Some of the money was used. Iran asked the Hezbollah to get the 7 captives out. And they had been in jail since 1982. Why were they in jail in Lebanon? How did they get there?
Yeah, I was going to say they were being held in Lebanon at that time.
Yeah. Well, you remember Alexander Haig,
Right.
and Menachem Begin. Mm-hmm. What's that all about?
Another deal gone south.
Well, Alexander Haig was a Kissinger protege, and he gave Menachem Begin the green light. You can invade Lebanon and Syria and exterminate the PLO. Well, Menachem Begin overreached. And when he got there, he was involved with all kinds of new enemies in Syria and Lebanon.
Right.
So then the State Department comes to the rescue, and they send a guy by the name of Philip Habib there. They say, Alexander Haig has to be dropped. We got to get a new Secretary of State.
And this is when Schultz came in.
Yeah, to Bechtel.
Because Haig wasn't there for very long, was he? He was only 1 year?
1 year
and a half?
81, 82.
Yeah.
And so he goes out under a cloud. And I think that it's Caspar Weinberger who's really the key man in the Reagan administration. Because he says, bring in Schultz, and we can work together, and we can do like Kissinger does, balance the Israelis and the Middle Easterners and keep these. See, they wanted a deal with the PLO. They didn't want to destroy the PLO, and they didn't want to destroy Lebanon, and they didn't want to destroy Syria. They wanted to have the balance of power. So they gave Israel all of the weapons they wanted. The condition, you got to go back to Israel. You got to get out of Beirut because you can't occupy that. It's too big.
Right.
And then the United States Navy took PLO out and brought them to Tunis. And then they came back in 1986 after Reagan was gone, or 1993, I think it was. Oslo Agreement.
Oslo, yeah.
Yeah, they negotiate again.
Yeah.
See, so it's balance of power game.
Yeah.
That's what Caspar Weinberger was capable of doing. So anyway, Menachem Begin's war was a failure. He started in 1982, and in 1985 he had to give up and goes back. But the Reagan administration makes a deal with the Israeli Defense Department. No worry, you can have all the weapons you want. You're safe. Nobody's going to bomb Israel.
Yeah, we back their play.
Yeah, right. So that was a successful
Placed second.
diplomacy on the part of Caspar Weinberger, with the assistance of Schultz. The Defense Department and the State Department were working hand in glove.
Yeah.
And Reagan
But
really,
what they lost.
yeah, and Reagan really didn't know anything that was going on.
Uh-huh.
Reagan was only the public relations man. He could say, well, I'm friendly to Jews, I'm friendly to Christians, Catholics, any religion. I'm just the happy-go-lucky man from 1932, in which all men are brothers, and there's no problem. We're all friends. So he got away with it.
Well, and what ended up happening, though, was after Israel goes in there, there are various hostages captured. And those are the hostages at the center of what you're talking in Lebanon.
Well, Hezbollah got it.
Hezbollah got them, which is...
And they got released. They said, here's those tolls, now you release the guy.
they were used as a bargaining chip.
Right. So
In the arms dealing between the United States and Iran.
And Iran had to pay for it all in oil.
Yeah.
And then the oil also paid for Ollie North to bring
Well-
money back
well,
to the
this is-
Pentagon, get
yeah.
small weapons and deliver them to Honduras.
And this was Ollie North's big plan was, okay, we've got this money here from these arms deals.
Right.
And now we can take this and he funneled it through a complex system of organizations.
Right.
In order to essentially arm the Contras.
Right.
In Nicaragua. And
Right.
he conspired in various ways to overthrow the Sandinistas.
Right. So Caspar Weinberger did know that Ronald Reagan knew, but he kept that off the record.
Yeah.
That's-
And I think there's a lot of evidence that Reagan had some knowledge of what was going on.
He had to prove it. He had to sign it.
Because Iran
He is the
and
president.
Israel did not want to move
Right.
forward with the weapon sales unless they knew that it had approval from the very top of
That's right.
the United States administration.
Right.
There's a story in 1985 when Reagan goes to the Bethesda Naval Hospital for colon cancer surgery.
Right.
And while he was recovering in the hospital, Robert McFarlane, then National Security Advisor, meets with him and tells him that representatives from Israel had contacted the National Security Agency to pass on confidential information for what Reagan described as a moderate Iranian faction opposed to the Ayatollah. And in Reagan's account, McFarlane tells him that the Iranians have offered to persuade the Hezbollah militants to release the 7 U.S. hostages. McFarlane met with the Israeli intermediaries, and Reagan claims that he allowed this because he believed that establishing relations with the country and preventing the Soviet Union from doing the same was beneficial.
Yeah.
That's what he claimed.
Right.
And he claims that the arms sales were to moderate factions of the Iranians. And
Right.
but as far as a practical consequence, it's just a load of hooey.
Well, the 7 hostages got out. They're happy.
The 7 hostages got out, but to pretend as though there's some moderate Iranian interest that isn't coordinating
That's a myth.
intimately with the
That's a myth.
Ayatollah,
That's a myth.
it's a total fabrication.
Moderate means friends of the United States.
Yeah, right.
Terrorist means enemies of the United States.
Right. And I don't
That's
buy
just-
that
that's just
line
a-
from Reagan for a second.
No. And they still have moderates around, but what's a
Well,
moderate?
yeah, I mean, Iran it has a culture, it has a society, and it has a spectrum of political thinking.
I think
But there wasn't some faction at the time in Iran that was going to be able to buck the Ayatollah and take control or something like it. It wasn't happening.
It was Jimmy Carter who knocked the word moderate out of the ballpark, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Bitburg incident?
No.
Well, Bitburg was another mistake. Ronald Reagan, it was George Bush, wasn't it?
Oh, HW?
Yeah, didn't he?
41?
Yeah, he
Yeah.
went to a cemetery in Germany, and they had SS officers buried there.
Oh.
And they made a big stink about it. They said, what are you
Right.
going to Bitburg for?
Right.
And he says, well, they're only moderates. And Jimmy Carter says, well, you know, Goering was more moderate than Goebbels. But I wouldn't have gone to Pittsburgh. I thought that was the greatest joke that Carter pulled on him.
Yeah, that's a pretty good line.
And I've never used the word moderate again.
Right.
Moderate.
Yeah, it's kind of a joke. That was his defense, but
Yeah, well, it worked in Reagan's time,
yeah.
but it was getting to be a little sharp one by the time
Yeah,
of the second
HW.
Bush
Right.
administration. Anyway, Schultz was Secretary of State, so he really didn't know anything about the Security Council, the National Security Council. And Chief of Staff Don Regan was too new at the job
Mm-hmm.
because it used to be Baker's job.
Yeah, James
Well, Baker
Baker.
got out before this all blew up.
Yeah,
He says, I'm going to change jobs.
yeah.
So the Secretary of Treasury...
There were a lot of guys who were jumping ship
Yeah,
just at the right time.
Who got out. And Baker... So
McFarland, Robert McFarland, who I talked about, he got out before Poindexter took over.
Yeah, right. He resigned. He wanted to commit suicide.
He said he wanted to spend time with his family, but I
right.
think he just...
Well, he did have a mental problem.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, and that, for the conspiracy theorists out there, I mean, there's some strange goings on there that you could spend hours on the internet looking into what happened with Mr. McFarland there.
Right. So the job went to Poindexter in December of '85. Poindexter now is the deputy, becomes the national security
Right.
advisor. And so Poindexter is out of it for a while. And let's look at American-Israeli relations. That's very interesting.
At this point, especially with
Well,
the neoconservatives.
I want to take a little review, okay?
Okay.
Okay, you can stop me if you want. You want to stick on the hearings and such. Yeah, want to say something about the hearings here?
No, we can get to that. You can go ahead and, because this relationship with Israel has been evolving up until this point.
Yeah, I just want to kind of review that. The newspapers and the television say Israel is a major ally. Well, that isn't true. The United States has never had an alliance that was ratified by Congress with Israel. The fact is that Israel has had personal relations with personal presidents ever since Truman. And I would call Truman's relations with Israel in 1948 as A. And then Eisenhower in 1956 drops down to C minus. Then in the 1967 crisis, well, before you get to that, Kennedy.
Well, we have Kennedy and Johnson.
Kennedy from 1960-63 had B relations. He called Israel a special relationship.
Yeah.
But then he said he wanted to inspect those bombs in Dimona, and Israel wouldn't allow that.
But then Johnson comes along, and he was
He's pro-Israel.
very friendly to Israel.
Right. It's A+ under Johnson. And Israel doubles its size. And that's part of the problem, is that these presidents make deals with Israel on a personal basis. Now, with Nixon and Kissinger from 1968 to 74, you could call the relations C+. They got along on some issues, and they disagreed on other issues. And that was because of the Yom Kippur War. And Kissinger made them negotiate and go back. Ford and Kissinger, better relations, went up to a B. Then Carter came in 1976. It started off at a C. And then when the Iranians got in there and the Afghans got in there, it went down to a C minus or D by 1980. And Reagan came in with strong support on the part of American Jews and
the neoconservatives.
Neoconservatives, right.
Your Podhoretz and the rest of them.
Right. So you want to rate these different presidents, and the Democratic Party had C plus B minus relations at this time. And then we have 1976 to 1980. Carter dropped down to an all-time low. I give Carter A on his moral Christian values, but he only gets a C minus on his diplomatic skills, because he was not a Weinberger. He was not a
He wasn't.
He
He's kind of an idealist.
Yeah, he couldn't be a.
He wasn't
dealer.
shrewd.
Right.
The way they could be.
And he didn't
or the
know
way
enough about
Johnson
the
could
oil
be
business. He was an idealist on ecology. So that's been the bumpy road of American-Israeli relations. And they're now in question right now with this Menachem Begin, and not with Netanyahu.
Well, Netanyahu's a hardliner.
Yeah, but
against Iran,
right?
And he's taken to
Right.
to really spreading the fear mongering about the Iran
Well,
deal.
is he a success or a failure? Is it going to backfire or not?
Well, it's hard, none of us knows the future here,
Yeah.
but as far as that deal goes, I am in the camp that thinks that is absolutely the best deal we can get right now.
Oh yeah, right. And that's what Obama is hoping. And that's what Putin is hoping.
Sure, yeah. Putin
But
has an economic interest in seeing a stable Iran
Right.
that is participating in the global economy.
So, getting back to Ronald Reagan, I think he was a lightweight and a good figurehead president. And
Now, do you believe that he was as naive as he tried to make himself seem? Because the thing that baffles me is that he got away with so much of this stuff because he seemed like he was this aloof figurehead.
Well,
but
because he could delegate everything.
by the same token, though, doesn't that make him incompetent? That these people are doing these nefarious things under his?
I think you'd have to say he was a lightweight president.
Yeah.
And he gave a 2-minute press conference at 2:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And he got A+ on the mass media.
Oh yeah, and they loved him. They bought it up, but of course they do because he was
But he's a great actor.
He was a great actor.
#1 in propaganda.
Do you remember the Saturday Night Live from back then? Phil Hartman when he played
No, I
Ronald
never saw-
Reagan.
Well, I heard.
There's an actor named Phil Hartman who did a great Reagan, and his whole Reagan impression was he would like have the kids in the Oval Office, and he'd have the photo op saying, "Well, this is all nice," and he'd be kind of aloof and a little bit, dumb. And then after he shuffled all the families out and turned back to his staff, his security guy, he's like, "All right, now it's time to get down to business, and we're gonna, become very intense." And I just don't think that Reagan was as in the dark as he's been able to, or he was able to portray himself. I think that he knew what was going on with a lot of these
He
things.
knew the general outline.
Yeah.
I don't think he was surprised by anything.
He probably didn't want to know the specifics.
That's right. He just said, well, that's the national security. That's why. Ask Weinberger. Ask James Baker.
Yeah.
He let Baker and Weinberger do all the work.
And therefore get their hands dirty
Right.
while he was able to keep
And then
his
he
hands clean.
So he got good press release. They didn't want to expose him.
Mm-hmm.
The Catholics didn't want to expose him. The Protestants didn't want to expose him, and the Jews didn't want to expose him. So he got a pass as being a true humanitarian.
But but in a nutshell, what he was at least allowing to happen under his watch and his administration was for U.S. arms to be sold to a state sponsor of terrorism, the profits of which were used to support anti-democratic fascists, essentially, in Latin America, and probably drug dealers as well.
Yeah, but I don't think he knew much about fascism. There's a famous joke that's really indicative. Ronald Reagan meets the Prime Minister of Israel, and Israel said, you know, the Holocaust is very serious. And Ronald Reagan says, I know all about it. I was there at the time of the Holocaust. You were? But he played that in a movie.
In a movie, yeah.
Yeah, I'm helped liberate them. So he mixed up his script with reality.
But how about the hypocrisy? I mean, drawing a parallel to present day foreign policy situation, how about the hypocrisy of the right
I think that's stupid. That is just absolutely
slam this Iran deal here, right, where they say that this is a terrible capitulation to Iran, and they compare it to Chamberlain and Hitler and all these terrible things, when here we're talking about Saint Reagan himself selling arms to Iran, actively selling arms to Iran.
Don't dig into the details. That's right.
And that's just a shameful, wicked cognitive dissonance. If that's what it is, at best, that's what it is. I think it's more intentionally manipulative.
Coattails. They have a false hero. It's a comic.
Oh, absolutely. Beware of false idols.
Right.
False prophets.
So anyway, the Bechtel Corporation made money through oil. And the Bechtel Corporation made money through arms business, and they were profiting by the Reagan administration. And Ronnie, I don't think, was doing it for money. I don't think he was doing it for money.
Money?
He was just playing his own self as an actor.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And of course, Nancy kept him out of real trouble.
Nancy was very protective.
Yeah, right.
And very shrewd.
Right. And she knew that Ronald Reagan was fading. And I do think he was getting Alzheimer's disease.
I think they've proven it. I think they've proven it now that he was starting to suffer the early symptoms of Alzheimer's by the end of his administration.
Kissinger's own private estimate was, I mean, Kissinger was behind the scenes all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But Kissinger said later, well, Ronald Reagan was a weak link.
Mm-hmm.
He really had no confidence in Ronald Reagan as a man who was really capable of being president.
Yeah.
He was capable of acting the role of a president. It was just a question of giving a few press releases, and everything was delegated. Weinberger, James Baker the third, did all the work.
Mm-hmm.
It was too bad, Ronald Reagan said, that you got caught with Ollie North. That was an accident. That's how I see it. So anyway, in May of 1987, the Inouye-Hamilton hearings unfold, and they do get Ollie North indicted in a way, but he got off with $20,000 fine, and he was released by the court, so he never really suffered from it.
And the special prosecutor declined to...
The Inouye Commission made recommendations to the special prosecutor to have trials, and they did have some prosecutions.
Oh, yeah.
But
well, they had a lot of indictments, too.
They had indictments.
I think I've got...
But nobody suffered
1,
very
2,
much.
3, 4,
How many indictments were there?
10, 11, 12, 13. At least 13, maybe
Okay.
more.
Yeah, just go over those again.
Casper Weinberger, Secretary of Defense.
What was he charged with?
He was indicted on 2 counts of perjury and 1 count of obstruction of justice. This was in 1992.
92.
He received a pardon from George H.W. Bush.
Yeah, well, 92, that's after Ronald Reagan leaves.
Yeah, this was
Even
later.
but late.
Right.
It took Walsh a long time to get the evidence. That's what we're saying.
Mm-hmm.
The hearings
McFarlane
Yeah.
was convicted of withholding evidence. He was given a plea bargain and probation.
Right.
William Casey was thought to have conceived of the plan, but he was stricken ill before
Yeah.
anything was able to happen with him.
Supposedly he died of cancer.
Yeah.
conveniently. He
Elliot,
probably knew a lot.
supposedly, right, that's a key word there. Elliot Abrams, Assistant Secretary of State, convicted of withholding evidence, also given a plea bargain and 2 years probation.
Right.
Various people from the CIA, Alan D. Flyers, Claire
Minor.
George,
Minor.
Oliver North is the big one there. Originally convicted of accepting an illegal gratuity, obstruction of a congressional inquiry, destruction of documents, but that ruling was overturned. He was granted immunity.
We only got 2 minutes, and I think we're closing on
Ollie
this.
North Secretary, various
the convictions.
businessmen,
And
National Security Advisor John Poindexter, 5 counts of conspiracy and
Right.
obstruction of justice, perjury, defrauding the government, and alteration and destruction of evidence. I mean, I just think that the American people should know how
They should. They
terrible this really was.
they should study history. They should look at the Constitution.
And that's what this show is all about.
And we should do that. And we call this debate as the auction of democracy. And I think we've kind of wound up the Inouye hearings well. Hope to see you in the future.
Thank you, Professor.